Folks, my name's Phil. This is Turtle Studios, and this is a new type of pedal from Strich. So Strich is a guitar accessories and pedal brand, and I think they make some like pianos and stuff. But previously they've operated in that sort of affordable gear space, so they make a lot of pedals like this, which is their tube sole, which is actually a pretty great little overdrive pedal. But they reached out and offered to send this out for feedback and review. So they did send this to me, full transparency, but thoughts and opinions are my own. And yeah, so I've spent a couple weeks with this. I've learned the ins and outs, figured out the tones and the features and everything, and let's talk about it. Alrighty, so really quickly going over specs here, and I'm just reading off the sort of spec sheet they gave me. 30 different amp models, 25 guitar, 5 bass. It supports up to 10 NAMM profiles, which is pretty cool. So this will load 10, fully featured NAMM profiles, which is pretty great. Of course, there's third-party IRs. It has a 40-second looper and 100 different drum patterns. The drum machine in this is pretty good, and it'll work kind of hand in hand with the looper. It's pretty cool. It does have USB-C, so you can use this as an audio interface, which is a great feature for the price. It'll do Bluetooth audio, so I'm pretty sure you can stream audio to this. It has MIDI support, so I guess you can get a converter and do MIDI over USB-C. I haven't tried that out yet. And it has 125 different effects built in. And yeah, at the time of this video, it looks like these are selling for right around $69.99, so $70, which puts them a little bit more expensive than something like the Sonic Cake Pocket Master by a couple dollars. Pretty similar looking pedal. Of course, the pipe tones here has a more traditional stomp box-like enclosure. It's a little bit bigger, you might actually be able to put this on a pedal board. It has these interesting sort of rubbery, soft switches, and I don't know if I'd actually try stepping on these, but it is pretty sturdy. The enclosure is plastic, but it definitely doesn't feel cheap. I'd have no issues, throwing this in a bag. And because it is battery powered, which is another feature, obviously, it's been on this whole time. The battery life is pretty decent, it lasts a couple hours. This would be a great option to kind of chuck in, just a spare pocket on your backpack or something if you got a couple tones dialed in that you like. And then if your main rig goes down, you have this super portable thing you can just, throw down and you're good to go. So in terms of user interface, interacting with the pedal is pretty straightforward. There's the two foot switches up front, which kind of bank up and down on the presets. You have a master volume, and then you have this sort of rotary dial knob, which allows you to, cycle through the different parameters on the unit, and then you can click in and dial in the, different parameters and presets. You have in and out, which out acts as your headphones. You have USB-C, the power switch, of course, and then you have an expression pedal input. From what I can tell, the only thing the expression control lets you do at the moment is just sort of bypass the built-in foot switches. So if you were to put this on a pedal board, you could have a dual TRS foot switch that would allow you to bank up and down and not put wear and tear on these switches. It might be cool if they expand that in the future, but as of right now, it doesn't do anything fancy like that. Now, initial impressions out of the box, the unit itself sounded pretty decent, and I had a lot of fun with a lot of the stock presets. I didn't really have any issue getting, good and usable tones out of the box. I did, of course, tweak and dial them in and play with some different presets and effects, but for the most part, everything sounds pretty good. Now, I will say in terms of effects, you get a decent amount of options. It's nothing exhaustive or expansive, but you're going to get all the big players. So you're going to have a Tube Screamer-esque drive, you're going to have a Klon drive, a Blues driver, you get a couple different compressions. And on the topic of drives and compressions, one downside is that the drive slot also serves as the compression slot, so you couldn't run a compressor and a drive, you have to pick one or the other. In terms of routing, you can actually move the different blocks around, so you could, put a drive before or after your amp or play around with the modulation, but you can't stack effects, so you couldn't run multiple gain stages or, multiple reverbs or anything super crazy like that. It definitely gives you more than enough to play around with and make some usable tones and presets with, but it's not going to allow you to do anything super fancy. But anyways, moving along to the rest of the effects, in terms of modulations, I thought everything sounded pretty good. I particularly liked the stereo chorus. That sounded pretty good. I'm looking over here because I'm just clicking through the effects on the editor on my screen. Delays and reverbs all sounded pretty decent. Things like the plate and the hall reverb suited me for sort of an always-on effect, where the damp reverb is more of an ambient. Now, in terms of editing on the unit, you really have no issues working it. The rotary knob is pretty straightforward. You rotate through to the different parameter on the screen, you click into it, and then you can dial in, numbers or values or whatever. You don't have to use the app, which I know having an app is kind of a downside to some people, but the interface on the app definitely does make things a lot quicker. As of right now, there's an Android app and a Windows app, and they both work pretty decently. I have had some slight connectivity issues with the Android app, but it's not at this point something you download through the store. It's sort of a side APK they're sending me, so it's probably a pre-release issue, but worth noting. And of course, the apps are where you're able to import the NAM files or the third-party IRs, which on the topic of the NAM profiles I did play with. I found a pretty popular NAM profile of a Fender Super Reverb. And there were really no issues loading it on, pretty straightforward. You download the file, you drag it onto the unit through the interface, and you're pretty much good to go. And that's definitely a really cool feature. For under $100, having something you can load NAM profiles on is pretty cool. I mean, for that price point, you could use this just as your amp and cab simulator and, run external effects in and out of it. And it would be a pretty logical and economical choice at that price point. It doesn't have anything like an effects loop, but if you're just placing this, sort of traditionally in your signal chain, it would work fine for that. So all the options you get in terms of effects and amps are pretty good. I had no problem getting anything from, more mellow or ambient tones. The high gain tones. And I made a couple presets centering around, anywhere from Fender amps I like all the way up to like a 5150. And then of course there's a couple bass amps which I haven't yet played with, but it's a nice thing that they include those. And especially because this can load third-party IRs and NAM files, it could basically be a full-on bass rig if you wanted it to be. As I was sort of playing around with the different amps and cabs, one thing I noted is it would be nice if the amps and cabs had an option to change in pair. Maybe it does and I just am missing something, but on a lot of multi-effects units, you can have it so if you change to, like a Fender Twin, it'll automatically select the IR file for that, so if you're quickly cycling through amps, you don't have to go and change the cabs along with it. It's not a huge deal, it's like an extra click, but if you're not paying attention, you might not get the results you expect. This, of course, has a tuner built in, it's an alright tuner. You can, change the frequency of the tuner and have it, bypass or completely mute. You can certainly get your guitar in tune with this, and the display looks nice, but it's like the refresh rate isn't fast enough, so as you're tuning, it's just a little slow for the changes you're making on the tuner, so it's a little bit of a clunky experience. So in terms of the looper, I thought the looper was pretty decent. I'm not a huge looper guy, I'm not that great at using it, and you'll see that in my playing demo. But it has a couple cool features. It has the ability to sync with the drum presets you've selected. So, when you start the loop, it'll automatically kick on the drums, which you can set to be, just like a metronome, but it's a good way to at least keep in time with your loop. And then it has sort of an auto-sensing start, which is super useful. So, you click record and then the first note you hit of a reasonable volume will start the loop. And it also seems fairly intelligent as to when to stop the loop. So yeah, pretty decent. You could definitely have some fun playing around with that. The built-in drums are pretty cool, and you've got a lot of them. I mean, 100 of them. And they span, all the different genres: pop, rock, metal, disco, funk, blues, hip-hop, jazz, Latin, and then metro. You can just have it be a plain metronome. But I thought they all sounded pretty good, and given the size and portability of this, it's just another thing that makes this a great sort of practice aid as a pedal. So yeah, the Strich pipe tones, it's pretty cool, and for the price, I don't really think you can go too wrong with it. Like I said, the Pocket Master is a couple bucks cheaper, but this is slightly bigger and more pedal board friendly. The thing is, these days, there's a lot of options out there in terms of these affordable multi-effects units, and the reality is they're all pretty good. There's stuff out there from Moore. They're constantly releasing new stuff. They have a LI series, which is battery powered as well. You've got Flamma and, an endless list of different, affordable manufacturers. Velatone is another one. They have that GP5, which is like a Tonex competitor. And, these are all good units, and they all sound pretty decent and, have mostly the same feature sets. And given that a lot of these you can load your own IR files and your own NAM files, they can all sound pretty much identical if you dial them in to be. Which is good news, so it's going to come down to what suits your needs best. Things like form factor, color and style of the pedal, how many foot switches it has, if they're actual foot switches or these little soft touch ones, if this is going to be a desktop unit or something you're going to put on a pedal board. So thanks again to Strich for sending this out. It's the pipe tones, pretty decent, and if you thought it sounded pretty decent too, you could certainly find this, on Amazon or other retailers. And yeah, stay tuned for more guitar content.